Welcome, everyone, to this week's Soapbox. Our very special guest today is Dr. Lucas Morel. Lucas Morel is a professor of politics, the head of the politics department, although are you on leave right now? Or?
Yeah, I'm on sabbatical for academic year 2020, 2021. So as someone put it to me, you have spectacular timing.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that was actually, wasn't it? Anyway, he's at Washington Lee University. He teaches American government, political philosophy, constitutional law, Black American politics, and politics and literature with research interest in Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, and Ralph Ellison. He has also written for the LA Times, the Christian Science Monitor, First Things, and the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and he's the author of Lincoln's Sacred Effort, which I almost bought today. I didn't quite do it, but it really sounds like an excellent book. And then, of course, your most recent book, which we'll talk about here in just a few minutes, and Defining Religion's Role in American Self-Government, and the editor of the Ralph Ellison and the Raft of Hope, a political companion to Invisible Man. And we ought to get you to explain that one there because it really sounds interesting. So anyway, hi, Cher.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Dr. Morel.
Hi, thanks for inviting me.
Okay, good. Again, welcome everybody. We'll go ahead and get started with some questions here, and I'll start it out. Why not? Tell us about your new book. For one thing, I notice how timely it is. It seems to me as though that ought to be on the bestseller list right now. How's it doing?
It's not on the bestseller list, but it doesn't surprise me. It's published by an academic press, Southern Illinois University. But the list that they created is called the Concise Lincoln Library, and it's intended for laypersons, just anybody who's interested in Lincoln. And it's Lincoln and then you fill in the blank. So they have Lincoln and the Civil War, Lincoln and the environment, if you can believe it, and then Lincoln and the American founding. So it's pretty much what I've been teaching for over a quarter century. And as I've been telling people, if the reviews are bad, I need to find another line of work. So these books are intended to be written by scholars, but not written with much, if any, jargon. It's supposed to be pretty straightforward, the latest in that particular scholar's understanding of a particular subject, like Lincoln and religion, or Lincoln and the United States colored troops, as they were called. And so there are these little niche topics. The books are maybe 100, 120 pages between the boards, and they're supposed to be, as I say, a scholarly introduction into the subject. So if you like what you see in my book, there's plenty more if you keep reading and digging in Lincoln on the subject.
Okay, now I actually and I don't want to dominate this conversation all on this book, but I want to show something here real quick. Let me share my screen with you. Relevant American to speak to this moment in history. Could you explain what that means?
Yeah, I think if there's any time where we could use Lincoln, it's now. And it's because Lincoln understood some very important things from the past that he thought were worthwhile to hold on to apply, and as we say today, to be relevant to his own times. And today it seems like we're losing our bearings, our moorings on what really makes us a people, what makes us one country. We spend so much time talking about diversity, and diversity certainly has its place. But as I understand it, our diversity, as you can see around the world, will lead to chaos and further division and conflict unless there is something more fundamental, something more basic that we all understand and operate on. And I think what Lincoln learned from the founding was this principle of equality, that we are all equally human, our humanity, equal in our possession of rights that we have not because government gave them to us, but because government recognized that we all possess these things by nature or by God's endowment, as the Declaration puts it, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. And that government's purpose is to recognize what we have and what we build on the basis of that liberty and labor that we exercise, and to protect it, and that's the most flourishing way to live as a people. I think we're losing that. We're losing the concept of government by consent, rather than being bullied and pressured and mobbed into doing things and saying things. I think Lincoln can remind us about the rule of law and can remind us about a way of speaking about these things that, as I say, are things that we used to do, by nature, or if not by nature, but by habit. And I think part of that is because we've lost sight of our history, and part of it is because we don't spend a lot of time trying to understand what the requirements of good citizenship are. And so, no surprise, we're even doubting whether we need police at all when we find that sometimes police don't do their jobs well.
I'll tell you what, it is so good to hear somebody say those same sort of things that I have been thinking for a long time. Cher, what do you think about this?
Well, I thought it's definitely an interesting subject and one that should be brought up more often. And I appreciate, Lucas, you're doing this. How can we keep history in the forefront rather than continue to bury it like it didn't exist for those who didn't like it, or for whatever reason, even political or otherwise? We seem to not concentrate. I mean, I know even in civics in general, like the Constitution is hardly taught at all.
Right. And what's ironic is the people who are most in charge, if you will, of making sure the Constitution runs properly, at least officially, are rulers, and most of them are lawyers. And they don't spend a lot of time studying the Constitution at law school. They study constitutional cases, in other words, Supreme Court cases. They spend more time on cases than studying how this country was founded. And I'm not saying, by the way, that there is a one-size-fits-all understanding of the founding. There are debates, and that's what makes my job interesting. Political debates, debates about history. And this is a country that, of course, was born of debate and discussion and argument. Those, I find, and I think my students find, are the most interesting things in school. I mean, if you make that boring, you definitely should find another line of work. I think we need to get back to looking at primary sources and discussing what it was that our fathers debated about. How do you keep freedom? How do you make sure majorities rule in the interest of everybody and not just in the interest of the majority? Tyranny is bad, whether it's by one person, a few people, or tyranny by the majority. Tyranny is tyranny. And so if you're outnumbered numerically, you're a minority and your rights are in jeopardy unless you think that the majority can be trusted. And we're living at a time where we think if we're not in the majority, we can't trust government to do well by us. And that's a bad thing. The other thing about history that I'd like to mention is right now, if we're not looking at history, what may even be worse is coming up with a version of history that is not correct. You guys, I'm sure, are familiar with the 1619 Project. That author has come under such criticism. She's now claiming that it was never meant to be a history. It was never meant to, to get everything correct. It's merely meant to be to frame the narrative, as they say. I can't stand that word narrative. We should just use plain words like story, right? Today we don't have problems, we have issues. I think we need to speak in plain English. Well, the 1619 Project is giving us a different understanding of the past. And as I understand her essay, and I actually teach it in my class, I'm not afraid of that essay. I assign it to my students, and then we walk it through and see what her evidence is and what's missing. She had a major opportunity that I believe she blew. It was a missed opportunity to add to our history, to correct some things, to fill out the picture, especially the picture of the ways that Blacks actually did contribute to this country culturally, politically, economically. Those are worthy subjects of study. There is a right way to do that, but she made that the sum and substance of American history. And as I've been putting it to people, she made it, she turned American history into a zero-sum game. So in order to make more widely known Black contribution in American history, she had to take other people down. She had to take Jefferson down. And of course, if you take down Jefferson, if you take down the founders, you have to take down their greatest defender, and that was Lincoln. So she threw Lincoln in with all of those bad people in the past, and she made Lincoln essentially the equivalent of Chief Justice Taney and his horrible Dred Scott opinion. Those paragraphs come right after the other in her essay for a reason. And unfortunately, now this is being offered in public schools in New York and in several other states. She claims it's only supposed to supplement their history, But these teachers, and I teach teachers, high school teachers all the time. I do tons of workshops with high school teachers, and these people are great. And unfortunately, they're seeing this kind of history as if it was the sum and substance of our past, and as if it's not leaving anything out, as if it's not full of half-truths and balderizations and caricatures, which it is. And unfortunately, I have never seen her on a stage with any legitimate historian who takes issue with her essay. It's always her either giving a lecture or having softballs thrown to her. She does not want to face the music. She's not, as I say, ready for prime time on this, and it's unfortunate.
Well, it's interesting because I had two follow-up questions. I wanted you to say something about the 1619 project.
Sure.
Check that one. The second one was I wanted you to give me some of your thoughts on the state of history and the study of history and government, especially in the high schools. And you kind of answered that. Could you maybe expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, the big concern in the past, I don't know, half dozen or so years, maybe the past decade is we feel, and to some extent, it's true that we're falling behind in terms of the more numerical subjects, what's called STEM, right? Science, technology, engineering. I forget what the M stands for, but essentially mathematics, I assume is what it stands for. Very good. And so we think, well, that's where we need to put all our energy. Get people to learn how to code, get into computers, get people so that they're trained enough that they can work at Google and Facebook, right? Or Amazon. Mm-hmm. And I think we're leaving behind the humanities and the social sciences, like history and civics and government. The good news is there are a lot of resources, not just on the internet, but a lot of resources for high school teachers in particular these days, and organizations like the Ashbrook Center that I work for in the summers, Gilder Lehrman, Liberty Fund. There's a number of organizations out there where that they hold workshops for high school teachers, and these teachers are starving for this stuff. They love their discipline. So the good news is we don't have reluctant teachers in history. Most of them really care about the subject and want to learn more, and have such a tremendous respect for, in particular, professors. Historians, political scientists who are digging in the weeds and in the archives and really studying these things. The problem is they don't give the teachers enough time to give a thorough enough account of American history. They have to rush through stuff. Sometimes they have to meet what are known in Virginia are standards of learning. And so you hear this notion about having to teach to the test. And so I think some of that is fine. There are certain things about our past that everybody should know. And yeah, how you know them is you memorize these things. But the interesting things are the debates. The interesting things are the discussions. Like, good grief, how did we come to have a civil war? How did we come to a point where Americans were shooting at each other? I mean, it's one thing to shoot at people from outside, but to shoot at each other, something must have been really riling the American people at the time. And of course, we know what that thing is. It's slavery. Now, we can talk about states' rights. We can talk about the tariff. We can talk about all those things. And I'm not afraid of talking about all those things. When I teach a seminar on Abraham Lincoln every year. And the only way to keep it interesting is to make it a fair fight. So guess what we spent a lot of time doing? Reading Lincoln's critics. We read a lot about Stephen Douglas. We read a lot about abolitionists who were more extreme on the subject than Lincoln was. We read a lot about, John Calhoun and Jefferson Davis and Alexander Stephens, Robert E. Lee. We read, why did these guys think that Lincoln's election and the Republicans moving into the ascendancy on the national scene, what were they so threatened by that? And we don't have to guess. They told us. They gave speeches. They wrote articles. And I have my students look at this stuff, and then we draw our own conclusions. So I love digging into the primary sources. I'm not afraid of these sorts of debates and discussions. It's what makes me look forward to going to work on Monday.
They're a lot of fun, very educational, and great. Cher.
Well, and just to add to that, get your viewpoint, Lucas. Do you think that can you connect any of the dots to this, to political, of why history is being really put on the back burner? It seems to me as though some of it could be political because some of the history isn't very favorable to one or the other in terms of politically with the parties.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the neglect of history today has a partisan source. It's certainly been the case that in the past, especially in certain states, that history was taught in a very partisan way. It was taught in a way that was not faithful to the past. It was not accurate. It overlooked and, in fact, made things like slavery look as if they were the exact opposite. I think today, though, that the neglect of history has more to do with what people like to call return on investment. In other words, and I get this because, I teach students whose parents want to make sure that when their kids graduate, if they majored in politics, what's the question you always get? Well, what can my kid do with that, right? So higher education, not so much high school, because everybody has to go to high school, but colleges and universities right now have to justify themselves to parents, have to justify themselves if they're public, right? Like University of Virginia or Ohio State, they have to justify themselves to the taxpayer. Why are we funding certain majors if those majors are going to lead to kids having a lot of debt and then maybe not getting high-paying jobs? And so history, politics, among other disciplines, are not seen as lucrative, at least certainly right when you come out of college. I think a fairer test is where are these majors, 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road? We have plenty of people who come back to Washington University who are very high up in, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, and they do not have business degrees. They were art history majors, they were politics majors, they were English majors, they were history majors. And so what we try to do is say that, majoring in things like history and politics and the liberal arts more generally are things that not only can round out your character and your understanding as a human being and lead to an actual flourishing life. In other words, these are things that edify your soul, but these are ways of training your mind and your character that can actually apply regardless of what discipline you go into. You can be a pre-med and also do history or politics. You can go to law school with a politics or an English major, these sorts of things. So I just think that we too quickly think about, as I say, ROI, return on investment. If we don't think you can get a job immediately making some serious money, then what good is that major? And therefore, these are the disciplines that are slighted.
Well, that's probably, there's certainly some truth to that. And we learned that from those who took liberal arts, that they couldn't, didn't really serve any purpose for decades, that majored in liberal arts just to get through college. But I don't know, when I hear people that don't believe the Holocaust existed, what would be the reasoning behind not wanting people to at least know that?
That boggles my mind. I have no idea, but good grief, we're a nation of 330 million people. It doesn't surprise me that there's going to be more than a handful who don't know some fairly basic things, or unfortunately believe in some crazy, conspiratorial things. Sure. And, it's a free country. That doesn't bother me. If a majority of people believe those sorts of things, then we'd be in big trouble.
Yeah. How about the cancel culture? How much is that affecting this discussion that ought to be taking place?
Yeah, and I would say that I would take a step back. Cancel culture is facilitated by social media. I mean, if we didn't have Twitter and Facebook, entangling and enmeshing our lives, if we didn't have these technological ways where people can so quickly rush to judgment. And I mean, in the olden days, when you were pointing at somebody else's sins, that was called being self-righteous. We call it virtue signaling today. In the old days, it was called being self-righteous, and that was not a virtue, at least when I was growing up. Now, of course, to make yourself feel good, you have to find something somebody else is doing that you think is bad. And unfortunately, social media makes it easier for like-minded folks to jump onto those sorts of bandwagons, and in a way, really to not feed their insecurities, but cover up their own insecurities by trying to find something bad in someone else. I've never seen people who are self-assured and strong in their personality and their temperament, who have to pick on other people, right? Who have to magnify other people's foibles. It's usually the case that people who don't feel good about themselves, who have to try to find something bad in somebody else. Now, as soon as I say that, I got to be careful because I don't want to impute motives to anyone. But cancel culture, I think, is a real problem in a society where we actually need a robust, free exercise of free exchange of opinion and discussion. And if you don't have that, then how on earth are we going to keep our government accountable? How on earth are we going to make sure that power isn't abused? I mean, the fundamental reason we have the First Amendment isn't for pornography, isn't for, posting strange things on the internet. The fundamental reason we have the First Amendment is so that we can criticize our government, is so that we can keep an eye on our government and communicate to one another, hey, look at the great job they're doing, or look at the horrible job they're doing. By the way, we're going to have to pull a lever in a few months to decide whether those people are going to continue doing that great job, or let's put some other people in to do a better job. Cancel culture, I think, undermines that and it erodes a freedom that people need to have to think out loud, to talk out loud, and in fact, make some mistakes. Some people's feelings are going to get hurt, no doubt. One thing I liked a few years ago when those entering students came to University of Chicago, I think it was their president who said, "You are not entering a safe space. Prepare to be triggered." In other words, you are coming to a place where the very things that you grew up believing in, some of those things are going to get challenged, and we're going to help you wrestle with that. We're not going to replace it. We're not going to indoctrinate you, but you better be prepared to handle thinking about things in a different way, being exposed to alternative understandings of what the good life is, what's true, what's noble, what's beautiful. That's the purpose of a liberal arts, is to move from prejudice, if you will, mere opinions, to actual knowledge about these things. Cancel culture, of course, is emphatically 180 degrees against that. Cancel culture is precisely about certain people thinking that they already have arrived at the truth. And if you disagree with them, they just deplatform you. They are so insecure. So good grief. If you were secure in your opinions, what would you be afraid of someone expressing an alternative opinion? It's precisely when you're not secure that you want to close down debate. Frederick Douglass, one of my heroes, my Twitter handle is Lincoln Douglas, right? Douglas with two S's. Those are my two heroes, Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass said, it is not a coincidence that in slave societies, you don't have freedom of speech. It is not a coincidence that in antebellum America, the males were censored in the South. Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel and abolitionist magazines, preachers could not say out loud, all men are created equal, and suggest or imply that that applied to every human being. That was seen as insurrectionary. That was seen as fomenting rebellion. And so no surprise that think about China today and what's happening to the Uyghur Muslim population there. I mean, this is horrific, right? Those sorts of societies are precisely the sorts of societies that control the media, that control what can be said. Their schools aren't schools of education, they're schools of indoctrination. And those are the sorts of things that we are trying to, I think the forces of good in the United States are trying to prevent from happening. So for example, the trying to institute, speech codes, for example, and dictating ahead of time what hate speech is. I think in those, there are certain things that are probably beyond the pale, but if we're going to make some decisions, I would say that we're better off allowing for greater latitude of discussion and debate rather than deciding ahead of time only certain things are allowed.
I agree with that 100%. Believe it or not, this has got to be one of the fastest sessions we've ever gone through. Everything that you said I found intriguing. I wish we had about an hour or so. But instead, we've got about 3 minutes. And you know what happens at the 3-minute mark? This is the soapbox. So for 3 minutes, you get to take it and talk about really whatever it is that you want to talk about.
All right. Well, I'll just give you an account of my book's contents, and maybe that will spur a few people to take another look. My book is called Lincoln and the American Founding. And it makes one basic argument. The most important things that Lincoln thought and practiced as an engaged citizen and as president of the United States, he learned from the American founders. He learned it from George Washington, the founder. But even more important than a founding person was a founding document, the Declaration of Independence. And so from that, we learn human equality, individual rights, government by consent, the right of revolution, and this thing that Lincoln called the duty or the right to rise or self-improvement. He drew that as a corollary to individual rights. I've got a chapter on if the Declaration spells out our aims as a country, the Constitution spells out the means to those aims. It's as important as the Constitution is, it was a means to the ends spelled out in the Declaration. But you can't talk about the Declaration and the Constitution without talking about what Lincoln called the great behemoth of danger, the great contradiction, which was slavery. Lincoln learned how to deal with slavery in his time by learning how the founders dealt with it at their time. And so we've got Washington, we've got the Declaration, we've got the Constitution, Lincoln and slavery, and then a chapter on Lincoln and original intention. What is it about the past that's worth holding on to? Was Lincoln a blind devotee of the founders, or did he believe that we could learn from experience and practice, and et cetera? And he thought that we could. But on the basic essentials of self-government, Lincoln thought that the founders got it right. To learn about the founding, a good introduction is to read my book.
Excellent.
Yes, and I will promote it for you.
Thank you.
And I will actually read it. I have not read it yet. I did read like the first chapter and the last chapter just to get the idea, and it's a great book. I know I'm going to enjoy it, so I appreciate your time. Well, that's it for the Soapbox for this week. We hope everybody enjoyed it, and that you'll come and join us next time. Meanwhile, stay safe, stay happy, stay the course, and have a good day. Bye, everyone.
Lucas.
Good night. Thanks, Cher. Thanks, you.
Okay.